So let's just set the foundation for our conversation, beginning with the OneJax mission, which is to promote respect and understanding among people of different religions, races, cultures, and beliefs. Their vision is to build an inclusive community. So, from your own perspectives, with a lot that's been going on in those efforts and a lot that you've been doing, what do you think that you've seen with the work that you've done it's going to take to bring many of these various groups and very good intentioned advocates together to make a difference in Jacksonville?
Well, I think that we aren't all involved in the great big picture, but we all have such important little pieces to contribute, really important pieces to contribute. And I think then with all the pieces of us gathered around the table, we put a lot of what we do together, and we are all inclusive in very different ways. And I think it's very exciting, you know, and I think that when you're doing things, you know, you kind of think, well, you know, you don't think about that necessarily, but when you put it all together, you know that it's working, and it's definitely helping in the city, which is what our goal is, to help people in the city and to make it a better place to live.
Well, it's the gathering of, it takes so much to gather those people together, because they all have such opinions of their own. To be able to gather them and really hear one another, that seems to be the hardest thing. And to let go of their own biases, that would make such a big difference in this world, and especially in this city.
And you know, you say that and it sounds so lofty and it sounds so big, but really doesn't change occur one person at a time,
Definitely.
interacting with one person at a time. And sometimes it's just the smallest things that promote inclusiveness and an appreciation for differences. And I think of, Dottie, I know you're an artist, and I work with City Kids Art Factory, and you know, you have kids who are working in colors. And you know, art to me knows no boundaries. You know, it's what the individual enjoys, and so sometimes it's just the small things. It's not the big things. It's the small things that we do that really promote inclusiveness.
I guess I look at it a little bit differently. I think, Cal, one of the big assets we have, and business people tend to think about assets and liabilities. An asset we have is intergenerational. When we think about inclusiveness and diversity, it tends to become a discussion around race or faith, and what's overlooked sometimes is intergenerational issues. And you know, a company like ours, we have a lot of employees. I learn a lot from our young people. They think differently. They think more inclusively, and the more that I'm coming more and more to this conviction, the more that we can embrace the values and respect what young people are saying. They don't see the world through the same lenses that we do, and they see it in a much more inclusive way, quite naturally. And I view that as tremendously powerful, and I've come to want to embrace more and to listen more respectfully of what people much younger than I am, which is most everybody anymore. But they have something to say, and they have a point of view and a perspective of the world that is inherently more inclusive, and there's real power in that.
You even gave an example when you were talking about recently, young people came up to you because of some work that you did around social justice. You want to talk about what that was like? Did that give you, is that what
It was.
led to it?
It was quite informing to me, and it arose out of some work I was doing on the Human Rights Ordinance, which is unsuccessful in the end, but in many ways was successful. And I didn't make a big deal about it in the company. I just went and did what I thought I'd do and didn't talk about it much, but people noticed. And what was striking to me was how many of our young people that work for us would come up and express appreciation for the company and for me taking that kind of a position, to being in a leadership role in that, and telling me about their own issues. In many cases, it was about their sexual orientation and the things I didn't know. And what I learned was how cautious and insecure they felt in our community.
Very
And
much.
even to a degree in our company, which at first bothered me. But the more I thought about it, I understood why that would be and what a big risk it was, and how disempowering and dehumanizing the community can be as these are good people, and they describe their life in terms of deceit because they can't be themselves. They can't talk about things that are important and central to who they are as human beings, and how that slowly demoralizes and dehumanizes them. At some point, they won't be able to stay, and it was really moving to me to see that in such a personal, tangible way, and right in the confines of our own building, and it revealed to me how important these issues of unity and inclusiveness are.
You gave one thing, you listened. See, there are so many people that don't listen. You cared enough to listen. And so many times people don't have ears to hear. And so that makes the big, big difference. Because any of them that had to go through the meetings that we all went through knew what the feelings of so much of this city was, that they had to have a lot of strength to go there all the time. It took me a lot of strength for me to continue to go, because I felt that they were talking about my children. I felt they were talking about a lot of things, and I hated to see the hate and what was coming from them, because it was not what I wanted to hear. Because I've been in Jacksonville since I was 7 years old, and I've seen many changes here. And being first generation American, because my parents were from Europe, I had a little different background, a little different growing up. And I went through the years of my mother not knowing about whether her family, any of them, survived the Holocaust, and they didn't. But I grew up with that constantly, and I saw them bring people over here, and that stayed with me. And I also grew up in a neighborhood where being Jewish was not okay, and had pins put into me to see about if I had blood or not. And when I started hearing these things about GLBT issues, gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender issues, and knew that concerned my children too, and a lot of people I love in this city, I was devastated. I mean, I knew how people felt, but I was really hearing it. And it was very heartbreaking to know that I know that so many of them felt the way that you express they feel. They do.
You know, on the one hand, you see progress, and on the other hand, you question, you know, is it really progress? You know, Steve, you made a point about, you know, diversity being larger than just race and gender, you know, and I think with race and gender, people have become conscious of it. But when we look at other issues, religion, and when we look at issues of personal sexuality, you know, sometimes we get so polarized. I'm encouraged by young people because they become world citizens. They're not just citizens of Jacksonville, but they see themselves as citizens of the world. But by the same token, with the media and, you know, electronic mediums, and everybody can find information to support their polarized opinion. And that sometimes frightens me, you know, it gives me cause
We
to...
become different automatically instead of
Yes.
trying to be the same.
Same.
And the same we don't want to be, but we still want to be loving to one another
Yes.
if possible. I mean, you know, that doesn't mean we have to agree, but we can disagree in a way that doesn't hurt everybody.
Or without such discord,
Right.
you know, and polarization. That's the
Yeah.
part that sometimes I get concerned about, you know. Are you a Democrat or a Republican? Are you gay or are you straight? You know, why do you need to know? Why? Let's look for where we can find common ground.
Are you a human
Yeah.
being, and can I care for you?
It's encouraging sometimes when you see the kids, young people, they, instead of where it says race, and they check other human, and I love it. I mean, I just love seeing that, you know.
Yeah, and going back to what you said about one person at a time, you alluded to, I think, maybe a touch point in your life, Rita, that kind of set you on your way. And I'm sure there are other touch points that you could talk about where you had this realization, here's how I'm going to be able to make a difference, and has brought you here today. You want to talk a little bit about those
Well, you
touch
know,
points?
I feel as a hospice nurse and as a nurse at the Free Medical Clinic, Volunteers in Medicine, I feel that sometimes it's overwhelming to think, how can I really make a big difference? All I can do are the small things. And I try and truly love unconditionally every patient that I've ever had, which I think I've done. And you try and just show by example. I mean, I'm only one person, but I can make a difference. And when you lose that, if you're one person, you don't think you can make a difference, but you do make a difference. And you make a difference in their lives, their family lives, and it's kind of like the pebble that you throw in the water. And it just kind of spreads out, and you just see that, you know, and it's contagious. And I think that it's really important, because otherwise sometimes you just feel so defeated. You know, but I stick with that, and I feel good about it, and I think it's infectious for other people, and I just keep on doing it.
And it's the only way you can live. Because if people don't do that, nothing happens.
Right, right. And people are amazed that when I go to the clinic and there are people in the waiting room, I'll sit down and I'll talk with them. And some of the people there are very surprised I do that. I said, but why wouldn't I do that? Of course you do that. I want to know them. I want them to know me, you know. And it's so rewarding. And, you know, sometimes I go down and I said, oh, you may not be having such a great day today. You walk in the clinic and you walk in your places of work, and suddenly you're having a really great day, you know, because it's just so rewarding, and you really feel like you're making a difference. And I think that's really important.
Yeah. Let's talk more about what led you to wanting to stand in front of City Council? What drove you to do more work with special needs, not just your certification, but being a part of that community and with the LGBT community and the work that you've done around social justice here? What were some of the things that pushed you into doing that personally?
I'll try and answer. I'm embarrassed by the answer, Cal, but it was, I guess, to the point that Madeline made it. You know, it's person to person, one-on-one, and I can't profess that this issue was, you know, top of mind or front of mind for me every day. It just wasn't. And for me, it started with a phone call from a friend, Tom Serwatka, who I'd known for years, respected for years as a friend. Had worked together at UNF, and of course knew he was gay. And he asked me if the business community and if I personally would get out in front of this issue, and it was an easy. I said, well, of course, Tom. And he was very emotional about it. I said, well, why is this so surprising to you? And he said, well, I just never knew. And I realized then that despite years of friendship and getting to know each other, we hadn't really known each other because we hadn't crossed that level of communication where he was completely certain how I felt about him as a person because of his sexuality. And until the question was broached, the answer wasn't known. And it was an epiphany for me. And I realized that, I mean, I knew my own mental construct and what I thought, but it was clear that I hadn't exhibited that very authentically or honestly, even to good friends like Tom. And so my conclusion was I simply had to be more vocal, more public, more real about this, just to really be more human.
I have a test that I do on things. And in my family, being African American, my family was involved in the civil rights movement for equality of people of color. And for me, as I hear people talk about groups, I always insert African American. So whatever it is, and it hits home for me. And, you know, it's like if you can discriminate against gay and lesbian, well, what if you put African Americans in that sentence? you know. So it's like, I don't want anyone to exclude anyone from the table, because we all belong at the table. And so when I'm standing up for someone else, I'm actually standing up for my children and my grandchildren, you know, because it's easy to make the group another group. So, you know, and that's
And sometimes it's just difficult, just in a simple conversation, especially with our loved ones or our close, circles, to point that out. I mean, what does it take to, at times, to rise up?
Just to say it, because, I mean, I work a lot in the HIV community also. And so it's just a matter of saying it, hearing things, people make remarks and stopping them and saying, no, that's not all right. You know, I do testing and counseling in the jails every weekend, and I meet a lot of different people, of course, but they're human beings, they're people. And you just have to look at each individual and regard them as a person, you know, not in judgment, but just as a person. Otherwise, you can't do any of this.
I think that's a really important point, Frida. Silence is acquiescence.
yes,
Yes.
If you
absolutely.
see something and just walk by,
Yes.
you're complicit.
Yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
hard thing to realize, because we've all done it at
Oh, yeah.
different times.
Oh,
And
It's
you
hard
have
to
to
make
stop
the
yourself
stop.
and say, this is
Right.
not acceptable, and to call it out.
mhm.
And that requires a little being public and taking a little risk and having people not say kind things to you, but if you don't, you really are complicit, part of the problem and not part of the solution.
Solution.
You become not your own person. You've given away yourself if you don't do it. You just absolutely give away yourself.
It was sort of interesting, having been one of the founders in hospice here. We are getting ready to build the Hadlow Center, which you know, probably everybody knows that now.
Yes.
Originally, they called it Hospice because they didn't know what it was in 1978. So anyway, but when we were getting ready to build the Hadlow Center, the board had this decision what we were going to do, and they were absolutely determined that we were going to segregate all the AIDS patients.
I remember.
That's the way it was. So I was director then, and so I said, well, could we have a decision here if I go out and take care of AIDS patients and see what their care is and so forth, and which I did in the inner city here, and then if I come back and give you my decision, would you be willing to hear that? Because the board was pretty divided, about half and half. There was going to be segregation, a special wing, and closed off, and this and everything. So I did go out. I went out. I took care of 4 AIDS patients, and 2 of them had died. I work with the families. I work with everything. Anyway, of course, my conclusion was when I went back, everyone in this hospice will be treated exactly the same. There won't be any different procedures for anyone. No one will be segregated. And they bought that.
It's wonderful.
And so sometimes if you can go out and prove something or say you're going to do something, you know, and if you have the confidence of the people, you know, they'll let you do that. But you kind of have to work on it, and you have to work around, and you got to target the people that are the key ones, that are the leaders in that anti-thought process or anti-understanding, really, you know, of what the situation was. Anyway, so it was very successful, and I was really proud, you know, that I was able to do that. And it was hard coming here with my police escort to the inner city, you know,
Well,
but that's what you had. That's what it was going to take.
At the height of the epidemic, there were a group of us that would always go to the hospitals because the nurses wouldn't give them the trays, and everything was left outside the door. And we would go in and bring the trays to them and talk to them and everything, because it was like just a segregated group of people.
Absolutely.
Because people didn't understand, and they didn't want to understand.
That's right.
So it was. It's evolved.
Yeah,
There's
it has.
some of that still remains.
Yes.
It does.
Some of it still remains.
You know, one of my favorite authors and one of my favorite people is Maya Angelou.
Oh,
I love
I
her
think all of us do.
spirit.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
I love what she says, and she says that she doesn't allow hate talk in her home. And that her home has become a place of healing because she only allows positive energy in. And I just think that that's so beautiful to say that you won't allow that. And And she invites people to leave her home if they start to tell racist jokes or jokes that belittle someone, or, and to take that kind of stand. This is your home,
You have
and
to.
you invite people to leave. And I've kind of decided that, that's going to be my mantra, that, if you talk like that in my home, you have to leave. And she's not angry or anything. She just invites them to leave. And it's kind of like if you see the city as your home, that you kind of invite people to leave.
Very, very true.
So I think we can kind of all take that.
We're all adults here. I'm going to introduce a 4-letter word. They can edit it out if they want to, but I'm going to say it anyway because I'm kind of tracking some discussion here that a lot of people have done some discriminatory behavior because, here it comes, they fear. It's a strong word. There's a lot of fear involved here. You possibly also have had that emotion as you've begun to do this work, and you talk about how to overcome that and help others. Because there's a fear to step out, and fear of people that they don't know or have never interacted with, special needs kids or persons with disabilities. When I got here, I had 5 white managers working for me, and they said they'd never reported to an African American before. They've been managers for 17 years. There was that, and I said there's that 4-letter word there. So talk about how you overcome that, how you've done it. And
I think there's more fear of not going ahead. I think that not just moving on and maybe feeling the fear and still going for it. I mean, if you don't move on, nothing happens. And then you question yourself, why am I fearful? And what am I fearful of? And even though you won't admit to yourself that you may be fearful, because none of us want to admit that to ourselves, you still, you do it. And I think when it becomes more and more personal, as it has been with the LGBT issues and things like that, with your own children and other people that you care a great deal about, you just go on. Yeah. And you almost feel sorry for people that won't speak out because you feel that they're losing so much of themselves.
And I think fear sometimes is based on lack of knowledge. And, like you were saying that you had individuals who were working for you who had indicated they'd never had an African American manager. Well, once they have an African American manager, they realize, wow, no different than anybody else, Go to lunch at the same time, come to work, drive a car. And it's kind of like that's no matter what group you put in the blank, typically it's based on lack of knowledge, lack of understanding. And sometimes if we can just get people who are different together to just have dialogue, I think of study circles, and I can remember, and this is a personal experience, not understanding the big hoopla over, the Braves and Native Americans being offended by certain things. And I mean, I was a full-fledged adult at that point. And I remember being in study circles for the first time, and there was one individual there who was a Native American, and he helped me understand. And, without having had that interaction with him, I probably still wouldn't understand. But it became clear to me. And because of that, I could say, to other people, you're saying nobody's hurt by that, but let me help you understand something. So I think it's kind of like each one teach one, each one reach one, that individually we can do way more than we think we can do, just by helping people to understand the bigotry and that fear is based on lack of knowledge, lack of understanding.
But you had a listening for it. See, a
Yeah.
lot of times I feel that ears are closed, and you must have a listening for it.
And part of it was the way he came to me to explain it too.
And he had to be the person that was willing to do it, and he opened that listening part of you.
So often I think we become combative, like you're wrong and I'm right, you know, and there's got to be a villain here. And sometimes we need to just open up to have discussions and maybe we're not trying to convince anyone, but trying to help them understand.
I think Kelly put your finger on maybe a four-letter word, but it's a powerful word. And to me, it's important to be honest about it. The fact is, at least I believe the fact is, everybody experiences fear. And Madeline's right, it's usually based on a lack of knowledge or understanding. And if you can make it okay to talk about that, you can get past it. And we see that in a workplace environment. You bring people from different backgrounds, and you have to make it okay to talk about that and get people to say uncomfortable things so it's out on the table. And we've had workshops with people so we can get Caucasians say, yeah, if I'm walking down a dark street and I see 4 African American and a black young men, I'm scared. And it's a prejudice. And they say, you ought to see how it feels walking through a white neighborhood at night. They're scared. And to acknowledge that. And you say, so why are you scared? And it's about prejudice. And it's okay to acknowledge that, and then you can talk about it. And I told people, I said, well, I don't want to say that because it makes me sound racist. And it's only racist if you let it dominate your life. It is prejudice, and you got to get past that. But everybody has prejudices, so confront them, acknowledge that it's real and it's human, and then work your way past that. But you can't solve a problem until you can articulate it.
I sort of have fear in different ways. When I work with special ed and emotionally disturbed children and everything, I used to evaluate kids in the 3-county area around here. And in public schools, to get them into special ed programs so they could get the special attention that they really, really needed. And I think I didn't have fear because I always do the right things for the right reasons, and that's sort of some of my philosophy. But I fear for these kids because I evaluate them and they don't go, I have more fear for what's happening to others than I really do in myself. And I feared so much for these kids. I'd evaluate this, and there was no place for them to go. There was no special classroom. There was no special teacher. There was nothing. The parents were uncooperative, and this and that. It was sort of, and I feared for their futures and what was going to happen to them more than I fear myself if I'm in, I've been in a lot of fearful situations, but that doesn't bother me as much as it does the fear that I have for some of these other people, where they're going to be. And it was, I was fearful for people that were dying alone. They didn't have the pain medication they needed and everything. I had more fear for them, but I knew I could do something to help them. And then that's when you feel okay, But it happens a lot because you see so many needs, and no matter how much we're doing, volunteer or work or anything, you'll always see other things that need attention. And my husband says, oh, well, you're retired. What is it next? And then there is always a next. There's always something else that you want to do, that you want to try and fix, that you want to try and make better. And that's the way life is,
Yeah, my family tells me that all the time. What is the next thing you're going to?
Exactly.
Because I'm feel strongly about mental illness.
Absolutely.
And a lot of different things, and it's just what platform.
Right, yep.
And all the platforms intertwine because it's
They do.
about people.
Yep.
I hear you all holding yourselves accountable for what you need to do. You're holding yourselves accountable to make a difference. That's one of the guiding principles of OneJax also, is accountability when doing this work. How would you kind of explain that to others to get them involved in being accountable? Because as you said, there's so many things to choose from. So why don't we see more of that happening across our city? We have so many helping hands that could help.
I think people, if they would just realize that they can do a small thing, they don't have to do a large thing. If they help one person, they've already accomplished something. If they have a neighbor who needs help, that's a great thing to do. And there are so many people that do need help in so many places. And it grows from that to something else. And maybe it doesn't grow. Maybe it's just in their own little apartment complex. Maybe it's just in their own little neighborhood. But if you don't do something, nothing happens.
Well, I think it's hard, especially I'm finding at the clinic, we have over 200 volunteers, nurses and doctors and everything, and a lot of the older docs that are wonderful doctors, but they just can't get into the computer age, really. I mean, that's part of the reason why they got out of it, and the same for a lot of other people.
Oh, yeah.
But you don't want to lose that valuable human being. So I said, oh yeah, well, don't worry, we'll get you a scribe, to do electronic medical records. I mean, now, I don't know exactly where I'm getting scribes, but I am getting them.
You'll get them. If I know you, you'll get
Yeah,
you'll
and
find
you
them.
don't want to lose them. And I think there's a big gap, too, today in society. I mean, if you're not on Facebook and Twitter and this and that and everything else, and a lot of us just are not into that, but you've got to do something, but you can help people get there if they want to. If they want to. I don't know, maybe you see this in.
I see it a little bit differently because we're all products of your experience.
Right,
and
right.
My experience is in the workplace, but the most powerful thing is simply getting people that are different to work together.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it doesn't take, you don't have to even do very much except cause those groups to form.
Right.
And they rather quickly figure out to
Do
point
you
them out.
form
And
those
people-
groups, or does someone else form, or
No,
do they
that-
form their own groups? Or?
And I've learned this slowly. I learn everything slowly, I think. It doesn't happen naturally. If you leave it alone, people will form groups that are just like themselves.
Correct.
And that's true of all groups. And it'll be around racial, around age, around gender, around
Right.
education background, any of a number of things, but they're naturally homogenous. And so you have to, business standpoint, you have to break that down and sort of force feed that to be different. But when you do, you don't have to do a great deal more. I'm firmly convinced people are naturally good. And I get disappointed periodically in that conclusion, but I really believe that. And they figure this out. They start working together and say, we're a lot more alike the way we hold much more in common than we hold apart, and which is a great truth.
And just a little thing, like today I went to a luncheon to talk about getting people together. And instead of everyone sitting with all their buddies at the table, you draw a number and you sit at table 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's the best way to get people mixing, And how many organizations and meetings do we go to? And everyone, you sit with all your friends and stuff. And it's so great to be able to sit at a table with no one that you know, and everyone gets along beautifully. And then you see them next time, and it expands your horizons, to what they're doing, listening to what they're doing, listening to what we're doing. It's a great. There are different ways to mix and to plan that. So many organizations don't do that.
Well, I think of the Leadership Jacksonville experience, and I was just there yesterday. So, but that's an experience, and was one of the richest experiences that I've had, especially since coming to Jacksonville, where you intentionally put a group of leaders together who are as diverse as you can make them, and you cause them to start looking at issues in the city and discussing those issues. And boy, I mean, you learn a lot. You meet people you wouldn't have otherwise met. You form friendships with people you might not have otherwise become friends with. And I think we have to take that kind of experience and expand it as much as you possibly can. And for us, I think it means sometimes getting out of your comfort zone. Getting out of those things that are comfortable for you and going to something else. I remember last year, my granddaughter goes to Ponte Vedra High, and she lives with us, and she took one of her friends to a party with a group of kids that this young lady did not know. And so when she got home that night, I said, so how'd everything go? How did you like it? And most of the kids at the party, probably 60 to 70% of them, were African American. And so she said, oh, Mimi, it was great. We had so much fun. Oh, and she's telling me about it. And, I'm just like smiling, and she's looking at me, and she's like, why are you smiling? It's just interesting to hear this, but I think we have to form more situations where we're getting people into groups that are different. That are different. You walk in the cafeteria in schools, and what do you see? All the kids who are alike sitting together, and I think we have to be intentional about this,
That's
especially with young people, with kids when they're so formative. So formative. You take a group of kindergartners and you put them in a mixed group, and they just play. They just play. And they call it out to one another. They'll describe kids in ways that we would never describe kids, It was the boy, that brown boy, that dark brown boy. You called him a dark brown boy. Well, that's what he was. Or it was the pink girl, Pink girl, yeah, the pink girl with the yellow hair. And they just call it as they see it.
And they accept it.
And they accept it. They don't put any
Which
value
is
on
the
it
most
or
important.
anything.
Which is wonderful.
There's no
Yeah.
value. It's just descriptive.
Yeah.
But it's not natural. You need to
have
cause
to
groups to
force
come
it.
together.
Yes.
You really have to force it.
The older you get, the more you have to
From a
make
community
sure.
standpoint, the more ways that we can, as leaders in the community, can structurally figure out how to cause those interactions happen, the more that kind of respect will build.
And in Jacksonville, how easy is that to be done?
I'll be a contrarian. When we went, and I'm informed by this human rights ordinance issue because it was recent, and it was public, and it was emotional
It's very emotional.
on all sides. And I remember watching, the people that were opposed to this did so with such passion, and you could tell it was in their hearts. They really, really opposed this, and something had stirred something very primal and basic in them. And you have to respect that there's something at work there. And the proponents were equally passionate, and I had some people say, "Why did you do that?" Because it was so divisive, it was so polarizing, and it was, on one level. On another level, and maybe it's because I'm a natural optimist, it was unifying. And one of the we were at UNF, and this is where we're kind of meeting with a group of the supporters, maybe 15 or so supporters, and I looked around that table, and this had all come together on an issue. There was no pre-planning or anything, and I looked around and said, you could not define a group on that. There were white people, there were black people, there were old people, there were young people, there were rich people, there were unemployed people, there were heterosexuals and homosexuals, and there was no demarcation, but they came together around something that was important. I said, there's real power here. There's something that was unifying and humanizing just by having this conversation, having this debate, and the issue itself made everybody that participated more fully human by their participation. And I don't know quite what that means yet, but there's something very powerful that can be harnessed, that can be applied and can be used. And it happened here in Jacksonville. There's more of that.
And it was OneJax, wasn't it, that brought together the group to have an open discussion around prayer?
Right, the civil discourse.
Right. And I think we can have more situations like that where we are intentional and we do bring people together who have differences, not to try and persuade one side to join the other side, but just to have conversation. Just to have conversation and not fight, but to have conversation. And that's the difference, I think.
Yeah, let me correct myself because actually it was around civility.
Right.
I said civil discourse because, as we know, at times just like that, we have to have this type of discussion, and we know there will be discourse. But to come together around civility around this issue.
Right.
So where are we seeing that happen, and how can we have it to happen more often here in this city?
And how can we better connect the city fathers with the citizens? I mean, I don't feel like I'm a part of it, but how should I feel a part? What do I do to feel a part of it? Usually
feeling not a part of what
of,
exactly?
of being part of the functioning of the city or the mayor or this or that and everything else. And
You just
usually,
go to a couple of council meetings.
yeah. Well, and the thing is, I mean,
wish you
usually
were-
when we go there, we have some kind of a negative
I know,
experience.
I
You know, it's
realize.
not a happy
Right,
experience. How
right.
do we make it a better experience for everybody?
It's interesting because my husband and I were just talking about this a couple of mornings ago, but I really believe there are more people who are moderates around here than there are people who are to the far right or to the far left. But I find that often our politicians speak to the people who polarize us.
Yeah.
They don't look for commonality.
Moderates don't speak.
Yeah, and
That's right.
you know, I think we as citizenry of this city have to do a better job of identifying candidates who are willing to step up and truly speak for doing what is right for our city, not appealing to this side or this side. And that's hard. I know, I mean, I can be the eternal optimist at times. I know that's difficult, but somehow we've got to find a way of doing that. We just have to.
I agree with you, but I'm going to be a bit defensive of the political leaders. That's despite some of the same disappointments. I think the answer to your question is the answer to a lot of questions, not simply engagement.
Right.
It's not just showing up at council meetings, but pick up the phone, call them, send them an email, have coffee. And my experience, and it may be anomalous, and I recognize that, but they're accessible, they're willing to talk and listen. And it humanizes the conversation a bit when you can, and it's on my mind because just this week, on Tuesday or Monday, I had breakfast with one of our opponents in the city council, adversaries, who was particularly difficult, and it was on his initiation, and we sat and we talked. We started talking about children and
Commonality.
church and
Right.
stuff and cars, just all kinds of things. And and I'm not going to say he changed his mind about anything, but we established a basis for conversation, communication, and I do believe that they pay attention to who speaks to them.
I think you're right.
And it is sort of the extremists on all sides. There's more than two, tend to be the loudest, and so they get
Right.
they get more airtime.
Yeah.
And I think it's imperative on people that are in that sort of centrist, right center to left center group, just to be more vocal and to reach out. And I do think that influences public officials. They pay attention to emails and who calls, and they count. I've gotten 53 calls and 26 went this way, and that matters. So.
But how many times have I sent emails, oh, the mailbox is full? And then I get some canned response back that's, you're the 1,000th person, and it's very difficult to get anyone on the phone.
You're right. It's not simple, and
Dottie, they'll talk to you.
they'll talk to you.
They don't want to talk to me.
They'll talk to you.
Their mailbox is full, their phone is broken, you name it,
It
anything.
takes effort, and it's a responsibility of leadership. Those that have, sort of by virtue of position, they have a bit easier time with access to use that platform for the right reasons, for the right.
And sometimes it means not always calling when there is a problem.
Right.
Sometimes it means calling when they've done the right thing.
Precisely.
Without dialogue, we can't get anywhere.
No.
We have to be able to speak to people and realize that we may not have the same feelings about things, but we've got to have dialogue with one another.
Right.
And we need to put it up front that we realize that we may not agree, but we want to be heard, and we want to hear what they have to say.
Preeti, you said something a moment ago, I think, is that the start of this conversation is that the moderates don't talk. And if, I can't imagine at a time the four of you might have been considered a moderate, but maybe possibly, I don't know. but at a
Some
certain
things.
but what is it going to take? Can you talk about what moves you? We talked about that a little bit, but how can you help to get them involved if they seem to be the largest group that has not been able to sway? we haven't been able to sway them. As you said, we're not trying to get them to take sides, but to speak from where they are. What is it going to take?
I think they have to be willing to really be passionate about something. I mean, I think they have to allow themselves to be able to really care. Not that they're not caring people, but they have to allow themselves to gather some passion for various things, realizing that they don't have to say anybody's wrong, but just express what they feel. And that alone will bring conversation with other people. But I think they've just got to be willing to have a passion for something.
Well, as we start to wrap it up, I want to really, I really appreciate your discussion, and as everyone is listening to these words of wisdom, here's your opportunity. Let's give them a charge. If you had the opportunity, everybody in the city is going to say, okay, Frida said I gotta. Donnie, what charge would you give?
Well, one of the things that always comes to mind here is the lack of participation in our voting. And in other countries, you get fined if you don't vote. A second time, you can lose your job and everything. I think that people need to vote. And how do you get people? I don't care who they vote for, but it's our privilege, and such an honor in this country to be able to vote for whomever you want, really. And I think that's really, really important. The other thing that I sort of keep tossing around is maybe we should have some in different areas in the city, because we're so spread out and we're so big now. When we came here, I think there were 300,000 was the population 40 years ago. And I was thinking about it the other day about something like town hall meetings and groups. And I don't know if people would come or not. Would you come to a town hall meeting if it was in your area or whatever,
Some parts of the city have done that.
Have they?
Yes,
Have they been successful?
I think it depends on the issues. It depends on the issues.
Right. Okay. Well, there's just so many
an
things
idea.
you want to do.
But it's a great idea.
Person to person. And, the other thing that used to be kind of nice when they had this welcoming committee when new people came to town. When we came to town, the welcome lady, we called the welcome wagon, anyway, came over and brought you goodies and talked to you and introduced you to your neighbors and everything. It's really a very nice idea. I mean, it's person to person, and they love doing it. Oh, here come the welcome ladies, with their little goodie basket and stuff. And then they also gave you brochures and this and that, and it was a very good PR for the city, to do that. I mean, we moved from Puerto Rico, so we were kind of, coming into a little different country. And it was really wonderful for me, and I loved it. I met people, and she introduced me to the neighbors and everything. It was a great way to meet people and have a conversation and feel like you were part of the community. I know it's gone the way of a lot of other things, and probably people would laugh if you suggest it today, but it was a nice person to
With
person.
the way of air conditioning, when air conditioning appeared in the world,
That's right.
people were not outside the way
That's
they
right.
were.
That's right. That's
I mean,
true.
that's
Anyway.
people used to be outside.
Right.
Neighbors saw one another.
Right.
When we didn't have air conditioning, we didn't have TV, and I'm old
Right.
enough to know it. So, but that people were outside and they really talked to one another.
Right, right. And one other thing that I really just love, the New York Times, I don't read it all the time, but anyway, on Monday morning they have Metropolitan Diary. I don't know if any, do you ever read it? It is just fabulous. It's people talking about good experiences that they've had on the subway and here and there. And some of them are just hilarious. But it's a great way. And instead of so much negative stuff, in the paper and everywhere, it would just be great to have something positive and have like a little metropolitan diary of good things that have happened. You're on the street and you don't know where you're going, and they lead you the way, or they're just wonderful. Some of them are hilarious, really, some of the things that happen. But it's just really, if you ever have a chance, it's on Monday morning in the newspaper, usually hidden away somewhere, but it's there. It's great. And maybe we just got to see how we can better connect, especially in this age of technology, how we can better connect with each other.
Yeah. What would you charge the city with, Steve?
I keep going back. We're all, biased and proud of your own experience. I really think leadership matters. Like Madeline said earlier, things happen one-on-one, and that's true. But at the same time, leadership equals leverage. And people that are privileged should be in positions of leadership, whether it's political leadership or business leadership, religious leaders, need to accept the responsibilities of leadership. And that means to speak honestly, courageously about these topics, because they have influence over people. They have people that are part of their communities or work for them, and it makes a difference. And it's easy to say, well, that's not my job. Well, it is your job. The community is your community. It's our home. And we have a moral obligation to use the authority and privilege of leadership, and it is a privilege, to make the community better. If you don't do that, you can't really say you're a very good leader.
I'd like to kind of drill down on that, and I have to say our children, you know, we give a lot of rhetoric to how important our children are, but when the rubber meets the road, we continually do things that is inconsistent with that message. And I'd like to see this community have a consistent message of how the importance of children in this community. And if we do that, you know, I think we put ourselves in better shape. And lastly, I'd like for people just to find their passion and to go after it. You know, you can't cure cancer in the world, but you can do one thing and be passionate about that. So, you know, just each person.
And we may have to teach people what passion is, because I think a lot of people have forgotten what passion is. They've truly forgotten that it's okay to be passionate about something, because they've been put into little boxes, and they have forgotten that, passion guides my life. And I think it guides everyone's life that's sitting at this table. And so without passion, you can't do anything, you can't accomplish anything. But it's almost like giving permission to people to find their passion.
Well, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this, and I hope you have
Thank
too.
you. We have enjoyed it.
Thank you very
Yeah,
much.
and they will enjoy it. Okay.
Well, we'll know soon.
We will know soon.
I hope someday you'll join us, and the world will be as one.